The cold sandwich that ignited a movement he had spent a lifetime navigating fame with humility and unwavering principles. When Keanu Reeves stepped into first class, dressed in black and carrying only a canvas bag, no one paid him any mind. No cameras, no red carpet, just another man in seat 1A, or so they thought. He had pre-ordered his usual, a clean vegan entree prepared days in advance. But when the flight attendant returned, not with his meal but with a cold sandwich and a thin, practiced smile, Keanu didn't flinch. He understood this wasn't an oversight, it was a choice, and they had made it about the wrong person. What transpired next didn't involve shouting or dramatic scenes, it was marked by silence, precision, and consequence. Keanu Reeves didn't demand respect, he quietly compelled the system to reveal itself. All it took was a tray served without care. Stay tuned to see how a seemingly minor act of prejudice ignited a storm that changed everything. The boarding gate had long emptied when Keanu Reeves stepped quietly into the jet bridge, his boots making almost no sound on the carpeted walkway. He wore a charcoal grey wool coat zipped halfway up, the collar turned slightly against the wind, with a canvas bag slung over one shoulder, his only luggage. His long, dark hair, streaked with silver, was tied back low, and a light drizzle still clung to the shoulders of his coat from the rain outside. There was no fanfare, no announcement, just a man in black walking alone into a world built for the loud, the privileged, the visible. The flight attendant at the first-class door barely glanced up. Her professional smile didn't even reach her eyes. "Welcome aboard," she muttered, then immediately turned toward a tall blonde man in a designer suit who entered behind Keanu. "Mr. Radcliffe, so glad to have you with us again." Keanu said nothing. He was accustomed to that, to walking into spaces where his silence made people uncomfortable, especially when they didn't realize who he was. He found his seat, 1A, with a front row window view, the best spot in the cabin if he preferred solitude and shadows. He placed his canvas bag gently in the overhead bin and slid into the plush leather seat without a sound. The cabin lighting was golden and soft, designed to flatter luxury but also casting long shadows. Keanu reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a letter handwritten in blue ink, folded twice. He tucked it into the seat pocket in front of him and leaned back, eyes closed for a moment, breathing slowly and deeply. This wasn't just another flight, it was the calm before a storm. The hum of conversation behind him grew louder as the rest of first class filled in, seats, laughter, glasses clinking. A tray of champagne flutes passed in front of him, offered wordlessly and whisked away just as quickly when he didn't respond. He opened his eyes again slowly. No one had said his name, no one had asked, no one had recognized him, and that was exactly how he wanted it, for now. Because Keanu didn't need recognition to see what was happening, the way some passengers were addressed by name, while others, like him, was simply background until proven otherwise. He had boarded this flight to Geneva not for fame or a film, but to quietly attend a private summit on global digital equity. No cameras, no red carpets, just hard conversations and careful decisions. That before he could even reach that conference table, this flight was already whispering to him, not with words, but with its structure, its hierarchy, its assumptions. Seat 1A, the place designed for power, had been given to a man they thought was no one, and that mistake would cost them more than they ever imagined. The seat was perfect, wide, firm, with polished leather and warm overhead lighting. Seat 1A wasn't just another number, it was where the most valued, most visible passengers were placed, the kind of seat that came with name recognition and quiet nods from the crew. But Keanu sat alone in it, unseen. He pulled the safety belt over his lap and glanced at the small screen embedded in the side console. A subtle welcome appeared in generic font, "Dear guest." Not Mr. Reeves, not even Mr. Just guest. He exhaled softly, almost amused. The system hadn't updated his name, despite the ticket being booked through his private account, which had been flagged Diamond Elite Plus for over a decade. 12 years of loyalty, hundreds of international flights, tens of thousands of dollars spent on quiet travel, always with minimal demands, and still, to the flight crew, he was just someone. A young male attendant passed by, nodding at the passengers behind him. "Good evening, Mr. Malcolm." "Mr. Radcliffe, champagne for takeoff." Their names rolled off his tongue effortlessly, like a script. Keanu looked up. He didn't expect special treatment, but what struck him wasn't the absence of attention, it was the precision of who got it, the names spoken, the smiles offered, the respect doled out like curated wine, selectively. He shifted slightly in his seat as a blonde flight attendant approached. Her name tag read Becky. Her heels tapped rhythmically across the aisle until she stood before him with a practiced smile. "Hi there," she said, her tone clipped and tight. "We'll begin meal service shortly." "You didn't select a meal online, correct?" "I did," Keanu replied calmly. 5 days ago, vegan option confirmed twice." She blinked, her smile unchanged. "Oh, maybe the system didn't update." "No worries," he said, his voice soft, but something in her posture, in her eyes, told him it wasn't just a system issue, it was something older, more instinctive, an assumption that he didn't belong in that seat. She turned without another word. Keanu sat still, hands resting gently on his thighs, back straight. The lights dimmed slightly for takeoff. Glasses clinked 2 rows behind him. Laughter murmured like expensive perfume, light and self-congratulatory. A tray passed again, caviar, warm bread, silver utensils carried carefully toward a trio of white men seated at 1C and 1D. Keanu, meanwhile, was given nothing, not even a look. He wasn't angry, he wasn't surprised. But as he leaned back into the headrest, he understood something important. This wasn't just a flight, it was a lens, a reflection of a system so smooth in its exclusion that it didn't even know it was doing it. He reached into his coat and opened a slim device the size of a credit card. The screen lit up faintly. His thumb tapped 3 times on its surface, record behavior, begin observation. The flight hadn't even left the ground, but Keanu Reeves had already started his descent. The plane was 37 minutes into the flight when Becky returned. She moved with the efficiency of someone who'd done this routine 1,000 times, heels clicking, smile painted, tray in hand. But for Keanu, every movement felt strangely artificial, like an actor playing a part she no longer respected. She stopped beside seat 1A and offered him a shallow nod. "I'm sorry, sir, but we've run out of the vegan meal option. There was an issue with catering. All we have left is a cold chicken sandwich and water." She didn't offer an apology, not a real one. There was no hesitation, no effort to make up for the mistake, just a perfunctory announcement of denial, as if it were an afterthought, a mere formality before walking away. Keanu glanced at the tray. The sandwich was limp, tucked between 2 slices of white bread, its lettuce already wilting under the dry cabin air. A half-filled cup of lukewarm water sat beside it, no silverware, no presentation, just scraps. He looked up at Becky. "I confirmed my order 5 days ago. I have the receipt, the confirmation email, and the follow-up text." "I understand," Becky replied, her tone suggesting she didn't. "Sometimes these things happen." Then she turned and walked away, no explanation, no offer to find an alternative, no acknowledgement that something had gone wrong. Because in her eyes, it hadn't. Keanu sat in silence, staring at the tray for a long moment but not touching it, not out of pride, not even frustration, but because he needed to remember it. This exact image, the sandwich, the plastic, the silence, all of it. This wasn't about food, it wasn't about a forgotten order or a system glitch. It was about a message, the message that his presence didn't matter, that in a space designed for the powerful and wealthy, a man like him, quiet, unassuming, dressed in black with no entourage, was invisible, disposable, easily overlooked. 2 rows behind him, the men in seats were raising glasses of Chateau Margaux. The scent of seared steak and truffle butter drifted toward his seat. Their laughter was light, careless. They hadn't noticed anything unusual because for them, nothing was unusual. Their experience was the standard. Keanu leaned back in his seat, the tray untouched on his table. His fingers tapped slowly on the armrest, rhythmic, controlled, like a countdown. They had made a mistake, not by denying him a meal, but by assuming he would stay silent, by assuming he didn't belong. He opened his small device again, the screen lighting with a quiet pulse, trigger bias event logged, cabin section 1A, timestamp verified. A quiet revolution had just begun on leather seats beneath golden lights, behind a cold sandwich that no one would remember except for him. The sandwich tray still sat untouched in front of Keanu Reeves, a monument of quiet insult nestled between brushed aluminum and imported leather. The laughter in the cabin had dimmed to polite murmurs, the kind of ambient noise that luxury thrived on, discreet, detached, and well-rehearsed. Becky hadn't returned, not to ask if everything was all right, not to offer an alternative, not to check on the only passenger who had been served something more fitting for a commuter train than for a first-class cabin flying across the Atlantic. Instead, she moved fluidly through the rows of passengers behind him, her smile warm and attentive when she leaned toward a white-haired man in seat 1D. "More champagne, Mr. Radcliffe?" she asked, her voice like honey. Keanu watched, not with anger, but with something colder, calculated. He had seen this pattern before, the casual indifference wrapped in polished service, the kind of exclusion that didn't need slurs or raised voices, just a carefully timed shrug, averted eyes, and the assumption that he wouldn't make noise. That in a space designed for the powerful and wealthy, a man like him, quiet, unassuming, dressed in black with no entourage, was invisible, disposable, easily overlooked. 2 rows behind him, the men in seats were raising glasses of Chateau Margaux. The scent of seared steak and truffle butter drifted toward his seat. Their laughter was light, careless. They hadn't noticed anything unusual because for them, nothing was unusual. Their experience was the standard. Keanu leaned back in his seat, the tray untouched on his table. His fingers tapped slowly on the armrest, rhythmic, controlled, like a countdown. They had made a mistake, not by denying him a meal, but by assuming he would stay silent, by assuming he didn't belong. He opened his small device again, the screen lighting with a quiet pulse, trigger bias event logged, cabin section 1A, timestamp verified. A quiet revolution had just begun on leather seats beneath golden lights, behind a cold sandwich that no one would remember except for him. The sandwich tray still sat untouched in front of Keanu Reeves, a monument of quiet insult nestled between brushed aluminum and imported leather. The laughter in the cabin had dimmed to polite murmurs, the kind of ambient noise that luxury thrived on, discreet, detached, and well-rehearsed. Becky hadn't returned, not to ask if everything was all right, not to offer an alternative, not to check on the only passenger who had been served something more fitting for a commuter train than for a first-class cabin flying across the Atlantic. Instead, she moved fluidly through the rows of passengers behind him, her smile warm and attentive when she leaned toward a white-haired man in seat 1D. "More champagne, Mr. Radcliffe?" she asked, her voice like honey. Keanu watched, not with anger, but with something colder, calculated. He had seen this pattern before, the casual indifference wrapped in polished service, the kind of exclusion that didn't need slurs or raised voices, just a carefully timed shrug, averted eyes, and the assumption that he wouldn't make noise. That in a space designed for the powerful and wealthy, a man like him, quiet, unassuming, dressed in black with no entourage, was invisible, disposable, easily overlooked. He tapped a single icon on the screen, forward to analyst Elise Grant. From the other side of the world, in a high-rise office in New York, a secure terminal lit up with a ping. The message was short, FL9 was sent. With that, a quiet shrug at 36,000 feet became the trigger for a full-scale investigation, one that would soon unravel everything she thought she understood about control. The sandwich was beginning to sweat, condensation clung to the plastic wrap. The lettuce inside was now translucent and sagging. Keanu hadn't touched it, he didn't need to. The tray itself said more than a confrontation ever could. Around him, the cabin glittered with the polished luxury that came not just from money but from knowing you belonged. Crystal glasses clinked, silverware tapped, porcelain hummed from overhead speakers as if to lull everyone into forgetting the hierarchy that roared even here above the clouds. Keanu sat motionless, his hands resting on the tray table, eyes fixed forward, not staring at anything in particular but not looking away either. From time to time, a crew member passed, none made eye contact. He watched as Becky poured wine for the man in 1D, her posture graceful, her hands careful not to spill a drop. Her voice dropped into a familiar cadence, one reserved for VIPs, just loud enough to flatter, just quiet enough to seem respectful. The kind of tone you only use when you want someone to feel seen. Keanu had not heard it once tonight, and he wasn't surprised. He remembered this feeling. It was the same one he'd felt years ago at a charity event in Tokyo when a sponsor assumed he was the translator, or in Berlin when a boardroom of investors asked, "Who's your handler?" Despite his name being on every patent on the screen behind him. It wasn't hate, it wasn't cruelty, it was dismissal, that soft, invisible push that said, "You're not what we expected here, and so you don't count." His fingers tapped lightly against the leather armrest again. 3 beats, then pause. 3 beats, then pause. Not a nervous tick, a countdown. Back in New York, Elise had already begun her sweep. The screen in Keanu's lap buzzed softly, a message service pattern match detected. Becky Whitmore flagged, for prior incidents. No disciplinary record. He nodded once to himself. In the seat behind him, the laughter grew louder. One of the men joked about real estate in Dubai, another bragged about outbidding a sheikh on a vintage yacht. Not one of them noticed that their fourth companion, the man in 1A, was the only one without a meal, without a name, without a voice. But Keanu didn't need their attention. He had something better. He had proof. He turned to glance toward the aisle just as Becky passed by again, her arms full of linen napkins and premium desserts. She didn't stop, didn't glance down. To her, he was background noise, the quiet man who wouldn't complain, the passenger who didn't matter. He watched her go, then leaned back and opened the next screen on his device. Activate cabin cam, sync, begin timestamp capture, section 1A through 1D. No anger, no confrontation, only calibration. He didn't need to demand better, he was about to document it. And this time, the coldest thing in the cabin wasn't the sandwich, it was the precision of what was coming next. The flight had settled into its lull, the hum of engines steady, the lights dimmed to a soft amber glow that bathed first class in warmth and illusion, the illusion that this was a world of equals, where comfort and respect were part of the ticket price. But seat 1A told a different story. Keanu sat still, watching with an actor's patience and a tactician's mind. Every movement around him was a performance, every interaction was a signal. 3 men, 2 rows behind him, Ratcliffe, Malcolm, Clayton, their names repeated by the crew like sacred mantras. Every few minutes, a flight attendant addressed one of them directly. "Would you like more wine, Mr. Malcolm?" "Another blanket, Mr. Clayton." "Dessert is ready, Mr. Ratcliffe." Their names had been committed to memory, their preferences anticipated, their presence celebrated. Keanu, not once, had anyone used his name. He was simply, "Sir," a placeholder in a premium seat, a question mark in a sea of certainty. He could have made a scene, could have said, "Do you know who I am?" But that had never been his way. He didn't weaponize fame, he watched, he recorded, he remembered. This wasn't personal, not really, it was systematic, built into the walls of every luxury lounge, every exclusive gala, every quiet nod of exclusion from those who believed power only had one face. Keanu had played enough roles in his career to recognize when he was being cast as the outsider, and right now, they thought he was invisible. That was their first mistake. He shifted his gaze toward the aisle. Becky had returned, gliding between the seats with grace and cold efficiency. She placed a dessert tray before Malcolm with a soft chuckle, then bent slightly to pour coffee into Radcliffe's cup, her hand brushing lightly against his wrist. Keanu's eyes narrowed, not in jealousy or resentment, but in pattern recognition. This wasn't hospitality, this was selective engagement, privilege masquerading as professionalism. He tapped the side of his device again, the screen lit with another set of metrics. It was building a behavioral heat map in real time, tracking proximity, engagement, length, posture, tone, data that didn't lie. Red clusters formed around 1C, 1D, and 2A. Seat 1A, meanwhile, was pale and empty, like a forgotten room on a blueprint. He exhaled slowly, gaze calm. They didn't need to serve him dessert, they were already serving him evidence. He tapped a button, sync to Elise. Cabin map version 1.0 uploaded. Somewhere across the world, his assistant's screen flickered to life with the cabin's emotional layout, an algorithmic indictment of who mattered and who didn't. Keanu closed the screen and leaned back. He didn't need a name tag, he didn't need a title. He just needed the truth to speak for itself, and it would, with numbers, with footage, with silence, the kind of silence that exposes privilege for exactly what it is.